join Devoxx. Hi, great. Thank you for joining my session called 10 Tips to Become an Awesome Technical Lead. Before I get started, I'm going to do the one thing that you should never do when you speak in front of an audience, and that's apologize. But I will do it anyway. On Monday, I completely lost my voice. I was in Ukraine over the weekend, and there's a lot of partying going on in Ukraine, trust me. And I had no voice whatsoever. So I will be drinking a lot of water during my talk. But if all of a sudden my voice sounds like it's going into puberty, just give me some time and I'll fix it. There have been a lot of talks at Devoxx here today that has quite a lengthy introduction. But since after this talk there will be beer and fries, I will keep it extremely short. My name is Bart Blommaerts. I am a hands-on application architect at Ordina in Belgium. We have a booth downstairs, so if you want to get some nachos or some vodka orange, you just come by our booth and have a chat with us. I work in a unit called JWorks, and we mainly focus on Java and JavaScript, so Devoxx is a good conference for us. And if you have any questions for me or remarks or any ranting or something, you can always reach me via my Twitter handle. So enough of the introduction, let's get you guys to work. I have a question for all of you. Who here in the audience considers him or herself a technical lead? So you have oh, that's really good. Then you know most of the stuff that I'm going to say anyway, so that's really cool. And of those guys and girls who are a technical lead, who of you has worked with other technical leads in the past? Okay, so there's apparently less people who have worked with other technical leads than there are technical leads. I ask this question at every conference that I'm going to, and the response is always the same. So if I start talking about technical leadership, it's probably useful to give some kind of definition or some characteristics about technical leadership. So in my opinion, the technical lead has two functions. He looks for the technical direction of a project, of a product, and he also serves as the go-to person for cross-team interaction, for making sure that the team does a great job. Let's dive into some details. Obviously, when you talk about technical leads, it's about technical guidance. It's about defining or making sure that some guidelines have been set up. What tools are we going to use? How are we going to deliver our projects? Maybe what patterns are we going to use, etc. Another characteristic for the role of technical lead is about risk and requirements. Here at Devoxx, we have probably seen a lot of really cool technologies. We have seen Spring Boot using Spring Boot 2 using Kotlin, and we might think, oh, I really want to use this in my project. There was a tweet at the tweet wall right behind me saying, oh, Devoxx is really great, but on Monday I'm going back to work on my legacy struts application, and all of this will have been for nothing. Some of you might have experienced the same thing, I hear by the laughter. If you are good at mitigating some risks, you might also be able to define, okay, how are we going to introduce new technology in our existing stack and make sure that nothing goes overboard. That's also about coaching. Most projects nowadays will have mixed experience within the team. So there will be junior developers, there will be mid-level developers, senior developers, and that makes a lot of sense from a cost perspective. So it's up to the more senior people to be coaching the junior people so that they also can become better at what they're doing. And last but not least, it is also about communication. As a technical lead, you will be working together with your business, and generally, business and technical people, they have a different language. They don't speak the same things. I will dive into that a bit more in detail. Now, the question that you might ask yourself is, do we really need technical leads? It's quite common in small to medium to large projects to have a full-time technical lead present, but some people really argue against the role. And they say that a team of well-functioning developers, that they can make the decisions, they can make the correct priorities and define what is important to work on at a given time. And I wholeheartedly agree with that. But even if these perfect circumstances exist, it is a very delicate balance. It's very easy to upset that balance, and then you will need someone to make sure that the correct decisions are being made. So if you look at this topic on Google or Bing, if somebody uses Bing, you will find a lot of discussion on this topic. So even in these perfect conditions, you might say, oh, everything is awesome. We can discuss the pros, the cons of every project. We look for an agreed solution. We look to find consensus. But if you ever seen the Lego movie, you'll know that not everything is awesome all the time. You can have really well-functioning teams where people really share these responsibilities, but your business will still want like a single point of contact. Who are we going to address to ask some questions? People will still need to be hired for the team, and people will unfortunately also leave. So it's important, I believe, that the technical lead is a role, and you need to make sure that within your team, everybody works together to make sure that some of the responsibilities of the technical lead are met. So, as the job title itself says, there's two sides to the story. There's the technical part, and there is the leadership part. And I will, in the slide, you will see that it's like 50% of each. That is never the case. But I'm going to divide my talk in two parts. First, the technical part, and then afterwards, the leadership part. So let's start with the technical part. And tip number 1 is advocate for change. Advocate for change means installing the mindset of like positive evolution. It's like making sure that you can always become better at what you're doing. Now, how can we achieve this? I'm a big fan of something called OODA. That means observe, orient, decide, and act. It is some kind of cycle. It's a re-entrant cycle, and in the observation phase, you can look at what's happening within your specific project. For example, you might have a build that sometimes fails. That's kind of annoying, and you can make certain orientations about that build. Why is the build failing? Maybe there's race conditions or something like that. And when you make this orientation based on your experience, based on what you're observing, you also need to make a decision. You can make the decisions and say, yeah, we're not going to do anything about it because some kind of reason. Or you say, no, I want to continuously make things better, and we're going to fix that problem. And then, of course, you need to act upon it as well. And acting upon it means, okay, assigning the problem to somebody and making sure that the problem gets fixed. And that might, of course, also be you. The cool thing about this is that this is a re-entrant loop. So it's perfectly possible that if you fix the failing builds, that all of the other builds start failing. And then you need to make new observations and make sure that you really improve all the time. How can you do this? I believe that as a technical lead, you should be part of the team. It's not somebody who comes, visits some teams once every week, and then looks out, how is everything going? Is everything still fine at your project? Yes, okay, then I'm out again. That's not how it's working. You should be part of the team, experiencing the same pain as the team, and always looking for improvement. In Japan, they have a saying that called this: you need a kaizen state of mind, a state of mind that is always looking for improvement and to things better. And I really believe in this. As a matter of fact, I've done this talk before at other conferences, and often after the talk, people come up to me and start asking me questions. Maybe they have pointers or guidance. So this also means changing your talk while you have already started. So, good evening, Devoxx. Welcome to 12 tips to become an awesome technical lead. Tip number 2 is work through failure and success. Things will fail. In Java, there's the official way of marking something as a failure called the null pointer exception. They will happen in production on a Friday evening. So prepare for this. It's not about finger pointing, oh, it's your build that broke it. No, that doesn't make any sense. Use your energy to make sure that the problem gets fixed. And don't fix the same bug twice, because that does not make any sense whatsoever. And when you are able to learn from this failure and make sure that you prevent it from happening in the future, then again, you're always working towards continuous improvement. Now, failure is one side of the story. There's also like the celebrating part of the story. In my opinion, we all have a pretty cool job. We're doing really interesting, creative things, and we should celebrate that. And it's very important, in my opinion, to celebrate often, to celebrate early. So maybe by the end of the sprint, have a drink with some colleagues, go have some beer, do something nice together. It's fun, it's good for the team spirit. And I also would like to share a personal story about a project that I did last year. And it was for a certain customer here in Belgium. And we worked very hard on the project. And in the end, we did a demonstration to them with the final product. And the customer said, wow, this is really, really good. And I was really happy. I was waiting. Oh, this is exactly what we want. And then they said, but we're not going to put it in production. We have new management. They have a completely different vision. We really like what you have done. But yeah, that's about it. So if you have been waiting for that moment in time, for any celebration, that's really hard. So celebrate early, celebrate when a feature is complete, and it's also about congratulating the team, because you're working on something together and you can say, oh, we really did good during this sprint. We delivered all the user stories that we intended to deliver. But that's not enough. It's also about congratulating individuals. So for example, if you have seen something here at Devoxx that can make your life better, make sure that you go to your technical lead. If you're the technical lead, well, talk to yourself. And just look out maybe implementing it. And if a certain idea, if it delivers, then you should also be congratulating the individual, because this will make sure that people get more creative and people really want to become better at the team. So just a small drink, some kind of team building, and you will have like a happy and a motivated team. And it's fun. Part number 3, stay technical. As I said, when you become a technical lead, you likely have convinced somebody that you're up for the job, but there's a lot of leadership responsibilities in there as well. So as a technical lead, you should really try to stay technical as much as possible, which means writing code, which means doing proof of concept, maybe do code reviews, and also have your code reviewed as well. Because in the end, you're working towards a certain technical vision. You're trying to establish the technical vision within your team, within your project, and you want to make sure that everybody adopts that vision. Now, one way of achieving this is by making sure that they, first of all, they know the rationale behind certain decisions. We're doing, for example, we're doing cloud native because of, I don't know, future strategic parts of the company want to do that. But also make sure that you embrace your team when you make those certain decisions, because that will make the adoption a lot easier. And what's also very important, when we start a new greenfield project, in general, the code base is really clean. There's a lot of unit tests. We do test-driven development. We do behavior-driven development. We do all those kind of things. And after 6 months, we probably need to make some kind of, we need to cut some corners to make sure that we make the sprint. And in 9 months and in a year, things will become increasingly bad. So even if you have other responsibilities as a technical lead, you should always be looking out that the evolution of the code works really, really well. And one thing that always surprises me as a technical lead, most of the time, I was confused by pretty women, I get that sometimes. Most of the time, most of us are really eager to work on frameworks, on new libraries, and start investing time in that. But in general, we're less interested in networking and security, because security is generally kind of boring. Deployment, yeah, we don't really, it's running on my machine, must be good enough, I'll put it in Docker and I'm done. And consistency of the code base, consistency of what you're writing. And that's really strange to me, because at this conference, probably half of the talks are about microservices, or about serverless, about cloud native deployment. So really make sure that you also embrace these and make sure that these like non-functional requirements are met. There's the difference between implementing a microservice with the latest Spring Boot framework and actually reading like the Enterprise Integration Patterns book by Gregor Hope. You really need to make sure that these are addressed as well. And with that, we continue to tip number 4, always available. As I said, there are multiple responsibilities for technical leads. And what I personally tend to do is I try to assign my time up front to certain tasks that need to be fulfilled. So the technical design is about preparing work for your team, making sure that you have a definition of done that stories can be executed and completed. But it's also about talking to business, because you have a certain technical vision, and you have this technical vision for your business stakeholders, because you're trying to achieve something for someone. It's also about project management. It might be that you need to create sprints, that you need to define user stories, subtasks, etc., etc. And of course, it's about code, as I mentioned earlier. Now, these numbers, they're just some personal starting point for myself. It's important that you decide what these numbers should be for yourself, for your project. And that you also evaluate this. So when the project has been going on for a certain time, it might be that you, for example, are spending way too much time on project management and you really don't want to do that. That's a good time to go talk to your product owner and say, maybe we'll need a dedicated project manager. Those things are possible, and evaluating on this will give you certain insights. But in the end, be realistic. Always available does not mean that you need to be able to reply to every question ad hoc. Some questions will be more difficult. Some questions will require that you do a proof of concept, or that you start talking to other teams, and just make sure that you ask for some time, or maybe connect some people together. You don't need to solve everything yourself, but when you ask for this time to work on something, make sure that you always come back to the person who asked you the question. It's a sign of respect, and then as a technical lead, you have like the power to connect people as well. Maybe you can work on something together. Somebody asks you a question, it's a really valid question. We haven't thought about this before. Let's work on it. Or maybe you can work on it with somebody else from the team, because maybe he has a lot of, or she has a lot of experience in a certain area, and things like that. Now, over time, you also get better at this time management. It's not the most fun part of the role, and I get a lot of questions on this. But if you just keep on doing your best, making sure that you evaluate what you're doing, you will get better at it. Number 5, be a mentor for your team. And I've divided this in a couple of sub-responsibilities. There's the mediator part, because discussions will happen. And in general, when there's discussions in the team, there's actually a good sign, because it means that people are passionate enough about something that they want to do the effort to discuss it. In the end, you're all working towards the same end goal, but as a technical lead, you need to mediate these discussions. You need to look for consensus, but if no consensus can be found, then you will, as a technical lead, need to make the decision. It is worse not taking a decision than taking the wrong decision. If you not take a decision, then the discussion will just keep on popping up, and every sprint you will have the same discussion. It's just cumbersome, and nobody likes that. The mentoring part is closely related to what I said earlier about coaching. If you have less experienced people in your team, they will need some guidance. And I tend to do this in a very similar fashion. When new developers come on one of my teams, I will code review every commit that they do. And it takes some time, but it's really valuable. And you can it's important that you mention why you are giving certain comments. If you explain this rationale to them, they will adopt it and they will try to do better. You can be very strict in this. In the beginning, I think it's necessary to be very strict in that. And if you notice that people are not adopting that, you can become even like the old bad guy in the team and just write unit tests that make their test fail, or that make their classes cause null pointers, and then explain why you did that, why you went to the effort. This will not make you very popular, but in time people will adopt it and they will understand why you are taking certain measures. Effective delegation. Also a very important one. You do not need to make all the decisions yourself. You do not need to be responsible for anything. If you have the possibility to give ownership to certain people in your team, be sure to do that. You need to stay accountable. This is very important. Some people will be really happy to take on more responsibility and do a really good job. And other people just say, this is not what I signed up for. I'll just like to code from 9 to 5 and then go home. That's a pity, but it's possible. I hope that most of you, since you come to Devoxx, are not in that category. So it's important that you stay accountable. Matching goals. Matching goals is about what I'd like to call, and I need to read it because I forget it all the time, specifically targeted dynamic coaching. What does this mean? It is specifically targeted. It is about your goal or somebody else's goal, and it's different for everybody. And it's dynamic because it means that your goal might change. Maybe some people want to become a technical lead. Then you can start with some role rotation, and you can help the people who would like to do that, or you need to share my slide deck, and then they will be an awesome technical lead as well. But again, in all of the previous parts, communication is really key, but matching goals, probably communication is even more important, because you're doing somebody specifically for one of your team members, and they will greatly appreciate what you're doing. And last but not least, when there are certain discussions and there's no consensus to be found, then you need to optimize for the group. You're working on something as a team. You want to have a good outcome. So optimize for the group, take decisions for the group. Teams that collaborate well will perform better, and well-performing team members will be more happy and will be glad to work on your project. So in summary, know when to give input, know when to make decisions, but also know when to step back. It's about sharing responsibility and giving ownership to other people in your team who are ready for that. Number 6, it's about surrounding yourself with other technical leads. And this can be done both on a personal level and on an organizational level. So on a personal level, when you, for example, work at a large customer, there will be multiple teams, there might be multiple technical leads. Make sure that you network with them. Find out how they are making sure that there's a technical vision without coming across as very bossy, because nobody wants to come across as very dominant. That's not something that in general people like. But it's also about their time management. How are they doing this? What can we learn from this? Don't blindly adopt. All projects, all people are different, but learn from each other. That's really really important. On an organizational level, it is about, are there like clearly understood overarching objectives? If you're working for a government or for a bank, there will be so many projects, and the bank has a certain goal, or the government has a certain goal. How are we working together towards this goal? The same thing goes for architecture. Is there an architecture that we're all working towards? For example, if you're doing cloud-native development, is there a cloud strategy for the company? Will we be deploying on Amazon, or will we be deploying on Cloud Foundry, on Pivotal Web Services? So things like that are very important to know as well. And of course, it's also about interoperability. The project that I'm working on right now is in cloud-native atmosphere. So we want to do stateless applications, 12-factor. We want to deploy a Docker container in Kubernetes, things like that. But we also need to integrate with the magical thing in the basement, the mainframe. So there's a lot of state in that as well. So it's important that you take into account that this interoperability exists. And then, of course, there's dependencies. And there's dependencies. By dependencies, I mean dependencies on people. So another personal story that happened to me this year is there was another project, and they wanted to go to production. And they had a dependency on us. So when they came to us and they say, oh, we want to go to production, how's your service? Are you guys ready? We had actually not thought about production whatsoever. We were not even close to being ready. So that might cause problems. And when you're blocking somebody else, that's even worse than somebody else is blocking you, because they can get very annoying. Then you're not alone. This might sound a bit corny, but when you notice somebody on the project that you're working, or even in the customer that you're working for, that struggles with something as a technical lead, reach out to these. And maybe in time they will also reach out to you, because the networking part is also very, very important as a technical lead. Now, there's a tip that I recently added. Think big, bias for action. Those are actually 2 of the 12 leadership principles for Amazon. So if you want to know how Amazon is working towards the leadership part of Amazon, these are just published online. You can just watch the 12 leadership principles. And Think Big is about creating and communicating a bold direction for the project. Because it will inspire big results, and people will be glad because they have the feeling that they're working on something really big. Now, when you're doing this, when you are trying to make sure that people are working towards something great, like the Star Wars guys, it's about thinking differently. It's about creating non-limiting options for yourself. So I'll have a story to explain this. Imagine that you have just gotten a dog. You really like the dog, but you don't know where it comes from. And every time you walk your dog around the street, when it meets another dog, it gets really aggressive. It wants to bite it, it wants to scratch it, it wants to really fight with the other dog. So you make a certain observation, and you say, oh, this is annoying, I don't want any of this. So you can get rid of the dog. But that's a limiting option because, well, the dog is gone. You might also say, okay, I will keep the dog, but I'm not walking it anymore. Maybe build some kind of shed in the yard and it can do its thing over there. Again, limiting option because you're not walking your dog. A non-limiting option might be that you put some candy in your pocket. And every time that you walk your dog and it sees another dog in the distance, you give it some of the candy. And you also give this candy to the other dog. In time, the dog will change its behavior, and it will make sure that when it sees a dog, it will think, oh, it's candy time, and it will become more happy. So that's not a limiting choice, but you can still decide to walk with your dog or not. You still have options available. If you're really interested about this, there's a really good book called Liminal Thinking by Dave Gray, and he has a lot of anecdotes and tips for working like this. Bias for action. It's not the opposite of thinking big, but it's about making sure that the correct decisions are being taken. Many actions are reversible, so you don't need to overthink everything. Maybe an extensive study is not always needed. If you look at the initial reasoning behind microservices, it's that they can be thrown away. We are going to try something. If it works, great. If it doesn't work, okay, maybe we need to revisit it. This is also about putting a flywheel into motion. If you put it into motion, it will keep rotating, and it will rotate even faster because people will see, oh, this works and we're doing a really good job. So that's really, really cool. And then focus on the things to get the flywheel to move. Don't focus on all the things that are cumbersome or take a lot of time. Just look for small successes in the beginning. Leadership. I need to keep on drinking because otherwise my throat will probably go into full puberty mode. Interviewing potential new team members. I've interviewed quite a lot of people, both to work on the project that I was working for as a technical lead, or also for the company that I was working for. And interviewing people, it can be really rewarding when you get it right. But you won't always get it right. So some tips on this in this nice movie about full stack developers.
So, you want your job? What do you do? Me and they have my hunter. Me all together. You are hunter. They many. So, they will say us happy. Say your more Hunter? Maybe get why do you leave that job? That's more time. Me raise a jump bigger. How long you with that job? 10 months. 10 months? Me hear you leave after 2 months. Me hear you leave and go travel around playing with family. Me too. Me don't try to change for them. Me just want to play. Me gotta just eat them. Yeah. That's lovely. Desire. Don't do that.
So that's how you should interview full stack developers. The long day part is especially true. A couple of weeks ago, I did 6 interviews on one day. It can be a very long day. But what I think is very important that is you know why you're interviewing. Here in Belgium, some of you might actually know the yellow guy is called Boomba. I have a 5-year-old son and a 1-year-old son. They really like Boomba. He's a clown in a circus. And on the right-hand side, there is Cirque du Soleil, which is also a circus. And both are really valuable. Both really have their merits. But I'm pretty confident that their actors will not be interchangeable. So when you are doing an interview, you need to prepare for the interview and you need to know why you're interviewing. Are you looking for somebody who will join the team for a longer time? Because when somebody joins the team for a longer time, it is generally less important to focus on the tools, on what is on their resume. It is more important to focus on their mindset. Do these people consider certain alternatives? Are they like really developer people? Do they care about what we're doing? And also, do they have like an eagerness to learn the tooling that you're using for your project? But on the other hand, if you're looking for somebody to just increase the bandwidth, maybe you have a deadline and you won't make it unless you make sure that there are more people on the project, then the tooling becomes more important because there will be less time to make sure that they learn your tooling. Now, very important about this difference is the book called The Mythical Man Month by Fred Brooks. It's about how 2 women are not able to deliver a child in less than 9 months. So again, be realistic when you're looking for somebody to increase the bandwidth of your project. I really try to focus on the mindset of developer mindsets, like thinking logically, identifying multiple approaches to tackle certain problems. Now, one tip that I really encourage you to not do is use Stack Overflow to look for questions. There are a lot of topics on Stack Overflow on how you should do interviews for junior, for mid-level, for senior developers. And in general, all the advice on Stack Overflow on that topic is bad. Because when you're looking for questions, it's not something that you're doing. If you are creating searching algorithms, okay, then maybe ask questions in this direction. When you're doing CRUD on a database, I mean, it's not that important that you know how binary search works. It's very easy to say what you should not do, and I also would like to give some tips on what you should do. And I have a certain way of always doing it at the same time. I will try to start by comforting the people that I'm interviewing, because in general we also get we have a tendency to get nervous at an interview. We don't know who we're talking to, we don't know, and there's a lot of things at stake as well. And I always try to do this in the same manner. I will always start by asking the same question. And I've not done this talk in Belgium before, but if you ever get interviewed by me, you have a head start. But the first question that I always ask is, what is the difference between an interface and an abstract class in Java? And that's a very simple question. Who in the audience can immediately come up with an answer? So that's most of you. But you would be really surprised by the answers you get to that question, even from very experienced people. And you can build on this answer. You should first and foremost offer some options. Some people like to give a theoretical explanation. That's fine. Other people like to draw on a whiteboard. That's fine as well. Maybe you need to make sure that you bring a laptop so that people can code something very quickly. All those options are valid, and you can build on their responses. If they have a perfect theoretical answer, for example, then maybe you can ask, okay, do you have a concrete example? Or what has changed with interface in Java 9? Because everybody knows what has changed in Java 8, but not everybody is able to reply what has changed in Java 9. And when you work on this question, you can when you build on this question, you can see, you can ask questions about what the people will be doing in your project. Look at their experience, the tooling that they've used in the past. For example, if they have used Spring, maybe you would like to ask some questions. How dependency injection, how does it work? How does it work under the sheets? Do they know this? How do they cope with certain problems? We all have seen the be not found exception. And also show a genuine interest in what people are telling. It's first and foremost, it's a sign of respect. And people will also open up to you. They will give you more useful information to determine whether they're a good candidate or not for a certain position. And I always like to ask a bonus question as well. And the bonus question should be something that you have experienced in your project, a difficult problem that you coped with. And you should tell the person that you're interviewing, okay, this is a bonus question. We really had this problem. We worked on it for a very long time. And then you can say they will understand what kind of problems that you're facing within your application, and maybe they have the experience to solve that problem quicker in the future. That might be a really good match. Now, in the end, you always need to stay polite. It is possible that there's not a match between what you're looking for and what the developer brings to the table, but nobody wants to send people home with a bad feeling. So stay polite to your interviewees. Embrace cultural differences is tip number 9. Now, this is a really big screen, and that green dot over there, that's Belgium. So on the world map, it's like very small. We all go home to lead different lives. Some of us are married, some of us are not. Some of us have kids, some of us are not. And this diversity, it's really valuable because your users, they will also be all different. You won't know your users. So it's important that you value this a lot. And as I touched upon earlier, opinions matter. It is perfectly possible that developers in your team won't agree with you or with each other, and they will have discussions about it. And you should try to embrace these discussions, because it means that they want to go the extra mile to maybe convince you about something, or to share their experience with a certain problem. So they're passionate about it. And in the end, everybody in a project is working towards a shared end goal. We want to achieve success in our project or in our product. And when you surround yourself with passionate people, the project will greatly benefit from it. So embrace these cultural differences and also spend time with the individual people to make sure if everything is going right with them, how are with their feelings within the project. Now, when you're working with offshore teams in different time zones, it can become more difficult. But on the other hand, it can also be an advantage because work will get done while you're sleeping. And who doesn't like that? And that has work done when you're sleeping. But communication might become more difficult, especially communication with your customer will most of the time not be possible. But what you could do as a developer team, a lot of developers prefer working at night, maybe do night shift, maybe ask the offshore team to do a night shift as well, and then you can work together better. That doesn't mean that you need to be working at night all the time, but it's maybe a sign of respect that you like once every so many weeks or months. In different cultures, communication can also be very difficult because some words have different meanings at different places around the world. The world DS is the perfect example for this. A couple of years ago, when I was still working for Flemish government, I was explaining a generic library that I created for something. The content of the library is not that important, and I was explaining it to a team, and during the explanation, I asked, do you understand what I'm trying to tell? Am I bringing it across correctly? Am I saying it right? And always got the response, yes, we get it, good, very well done. I finished my explanation, and then quite almost immediately afterwards, I get a telephone call and people saying, I have no clue what you just said. What do we need to do? And that's not on them. It's a cultural difference between what we are here in Belgium are used to. But you can mitigate that problem. You can make sure you can make this yes explicit. You can ask, yes, I understood the problem. And I know how the binary coupling works, or just make it very explicit. This is also really cool when you use instant messaging. Nowadays, I believe that probably everybody uses instant messaging. Who here in the room does not use instant messaging for work? There's 2 guys. Maybe you should use instant messaging. Because there's like 700 people who do use it in instant messaging. What's really cool about instant messaging is it lowers the threshold to ask questions. And you don't need to ask the questions specifically to one person. You can ask it to the entire team. Maybe you want just something checked. Say, for example, you have a certain ID saying, oh, I would like to do this. But is this library suitable for that? Or is this unit test really covering what I'm trying to do, because I'm not entirely sure? And you get some immediate feedback. But it's also asynchronous. So you can ask questions and maybe somebody will look at it in the future, not immediately. So it will lower the threshold, and you can work together better as a team. And of course, nowadays you can integrate with your CI/CD pipeline and tooling like that, so you know when your build has completed successfully, when it's deployed to a certain environment. Maybe you can have like a notification to your testing team saying, "Hey, the build was done. Would it be possible to test this specific feature automatically?" Now, it's also about the preparing work, especially with offshore teams. Your preparation might often be the only means of communication that they have with the business. So this is about creating like a technical design. This is what we're trying to achieve, making sure that there's user stories with the correct subtasks, that they can pick it up and work on that as well. This is very important to make sure that people know what they're doing, because it can be very annoying if you start in the morning, you're very eager to start working on the project. You look at the sprint backlog and you see, oh, there's like, I don't know any of this, what's happening. So make sure that your user stories are well defined, that there's acceptance criteria, do a definition of ready, do a definition of done, and that people can really do cool things on the project. And one tip that I find very important is that everybody is a member of the team. I had a project manager in the past, and I'm obviously not going to call his name, but he really treated the offshore development team, it was a Polish developer team, like cheap labor. It was like, just make sure that they get sent a bunch of work, and they're responsible for it, and if it doesn't work out, we'll just get more people. That's really not a pleasant way to work as a technical lead. Should really make sure that everybody is treated the same way, both the good parts and the bad parts. When somebody screws up and needs to make sure that he knows or that she knows what went wrong and how you can make sure that it doesn't happen in the future. Don't let this be the only takeaway from my talk, but it's perfectly possible on instant messaging via a private message to become very angry at someone. Estimating is hard. Do any of you know Douglas Hofstadter? A couple of you, okay. There is a quote from Douglas Hofstadter about Hofstadter's law. It always takes longer than you expect, even when you take into account Hofstadter's law. Estimation is hard. When you do it more often, you will become better at it, but you will still get it wrong from time to time. I like to say that mastering estimation is a journey. It's a lifelong journey, and it might set you apart because your colleagues will appreciate you for doing correct estimations. It will be a sign of professional stability and quality work. Now, how can you do this? If you work in agile projects, often nowadays people are doing planning poker, and in planning poker, it's about defining some kind of sequence. Most of the time, I think Fibonacci is used, but you just can define whatever sequence that you like. And then people sit around a table, and you have somebody who functionally explains what needs to be done. And then he or she counts down, saying, okay, 3, 2, 1, and then everybody plays their card. And when the cards played are all in the general and in the same order of magnitudes, then you can be pretty confident about your estimation. But if you notice that, for example, somebody plays a very high card, and everybody else is playing a low card, that's good, because then you have achieved something, and then maybe the person who played the high cards, they can give some explanation on why they're giving it the higher score. Maybe they know something about the problem that you're trying to solve that everybody else does not know. There might be networking issues, there might be database issues. Maybe you have a really bad data model for that specific use case, and then you can start a discussion. And you can play again afterwards. Maybe more people play the high card then, or the person who played the high card can play a lower card. Now, in order to do this, you also need to set a baseline. And then generally, when you read agile books, or you go to like the Scrum Master certified thingy that costs a lot of money, they urge you to pick 1 as the baseline. I never quite got that. I prefer to set my baseline higher. I will say that the 10 points. The 10 points will be my baseline, and the 10-point story is, for example, doing CRUDs on an existing table in a database. Because when you're doing smaller changes, you can make more granular, more fine-grained estimation as well. It's my personal preference. And this uncertainty, it's normal. If you keep on playing the cards and it turns out that the numbers keep on being very different, then there might be a reason for that as well. And there's 2 ways to cope with that. You might need to do a proof of concept, some kind of technical design to make sure that you understand the problem. For example, when you need to integrate your application with a third-party service and it's poorly documented, maybe you need to do proof of concept first to find out, okay, this is how it works. And even that might not always be possible, and then you just go to your product owner, to your business, saying, okay, we know that you really want to do this, but we have no clue how. We are very eager to work on it, but we're very uncertain. We play the very high cards, and then it's up to business to decide whether or not the problem will be tackled. Now, as a technical lead, you will also often be asked to work on solutioning. And by solutioning, I mean a customer comes up to your company saying, okay, we might want to do this, but could you give some kind of estimation? How much money is this going to cost us? But there might not be anybody who already works on that project. And I like to use the above formula. It's just called 3-point estimating. It's not something that I invented or something, where you do an optimistic, a best guess, and a pessimistic estimation. And then you just use the above formula to calculate the weighted mean. And when you do this, it's very important that when you make certain assumptions, that you document these assumptions, because there will be known unknowns, like we don't know how to communicate with a third-party service, but there will also be unknown unknowns. Something happened and we don't really know what happened. And you need to factor these in when you're doing this kind of solutioning estimations. And what I also like to do is adding a certain percentage, does not need to be 20%, although I use that most of the time. For testing, for debugging, for polishing, and for documentation. Maybe you have a formal delivered documentation. You also need to make sure that that's included as well. Because when you do this kind of estimation, it's important that you take into account that you're estimating for a team. You're not estimating for yourself for the best possible time that you can do something without being interrupted, without any weird things happening in the code. This is really something that you're doing for the team. So it's important that you stay accountable for that as well. As I said, it is difficult, and any estimate is better than no estimate. If it sparks up a discussion, then it's already a success. We have a tendency to become better at estimating when we're estimating smaller parts of the project, but we don't need to forget the overall bigger picture. It might be enough to get some ballpark estimate and work with that as well. And then, of course, share these estimates with your peers, with your colleagues, and get some feedback from them. And after the project is done, review your estimates. So, for example, we estimated it would take 20 man days, and it turned out it was 19, so we did a great job. Or it turns out it was 42. That might not have been such a great estimation. And this will help you to become better in the future. Interfacing with the outside world. I needed to have a picture with kittens on them, so here it is. Communication with non-technical people is different from communication with technical people. I'm pretty sure that when we go to the hallway, we can have a discussion about Maven, about Gradle, about things like that, and we all understand each other. Except like the neural network things from Katrina, I did not get that, but that's just me, that's not smart enough. But when you're communicating with non-technical people, they generally don't really care whether you're using Maven or Gradle or Ant. Don't use Ant. But it's about making sure that you draw some comparisons, that you make sure that there's like a ubiquitous language and that everybody understands. So work closely with your customers, try to detect the requirements from them, and continuously map their requirements on the technical vision that you're trying to establish. As a technical lead, I don't think that you should be the single point of contact, because then you will become a liability as well. Another short story that I like to tell, I've been at a project a long time ago, about 9 years ago, and it was a pretty easygoing project. We had a lot of mathematical algorithms within the project, but the customers was pretty relaxed. They were satisfied with what they were doing, and so I was having a good time. But at a certain moment, there's like the fairy tale project, the project that has unlimited budget, that has the coolest technology, that has the best people. And I applied for that job. It was with the same customer, government, and actually got the job. So I was super happy I was going to work on the fairy tale project. And then my older customer said, oh, no, you cannot go because you're the only one who knows the algorithms in the code. And I was like, oh, so I've become a liability now, and I will never allow it to happen to me again as well. So make sure that you involve different people in certain parts of the application, that you have a shared knowledge of the tool that you're using. So you should not be the single point of contact, but maybe you should be the first point of contact. Because in general, most people, especially developers, they don't like to be interrupted all the time. So that's something that you need to cope with as well. The magic word, no. I've noticed that a lot of the time I have a tendency to say yes to everything. Yes, we can do this. Yes, sure, we can build this. And that's not always a good thing, because sometimes you will be making decisions for the team. So you should be able to say no. When people come to you with unrealistic expectations, like can you build this in 2 hours of time, you should say no if it's not possible. So when the expectations are not realistic, really say no. And then the last tip of the day is facilitating agile teamwork. Just a quick question is who is using agile in their project right now? So maybe Scrum or Kanban. Who's not using agile? Just using something else? Okay, that's a minority. This is not a talk about agile. I also don't have the time anymore to go into detail. But when you're doing a project in an agile manner, make sure that you have a backlog, that you have a prioritized backlog. Do a sprint planning so that you can make sure that the developers know what they need to be doing during the project. Use burn down charts, retrospectives to know what went right and what went wrong. And important, your team's strength is not a function of the talent of individual members. It's a function of their collaboration, tenacity, and mutual respect. So if you have read the Phoenix project, don't be Brent, but just facilitate an awesome team. Make sure that you have a good time. Again, we have probably one of the coolest jobs out there, so just have a good time with your team members. And with that, I would like to thank you for your attention. I have 2 minutes left for questions. As you might hear, I'm quite sick, so it's better to ask it from over there, not come too close to me, unless you don't fear my germs.